May all I say and all I think be in harmony with thee, God within me, God beyond me, maker of the trees.
That's
So
beautiful.
I will turn this over now to Michaela.
Thank you. Well, welcome all of you to the second of 3 presentations in our spring series. Last week, Melaine Trukowski talked about our indispensable yet threatened native bees, telling us, among other things, how to attract them and keep them safe. This week, Nick Vallas will be talking about native trees and shrubs and 2 invasive detrimental insects that are doing their best to create serious damage. A little more about Nick. His favorite tree is the American elm. We were just having a conversation about that. He's a state licensed arborist and a certified arborist through the International Society of Arboriculture, where he has also obtained the tree risk assessment qualification. I know that's a mouthful. He has been trained by the Bartlett Tree Research Lab in the treatment of plants with problems, and he's our trees and shrubs best friend and is here to tell us how to keep them healthy and safe. So if you would all mute yourselves so we don't hear corks popping and dogs barking, we can continue with Nick.
Right, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity here to speak with fellow tree people, and I hope I can answer some questions today, bring a little enlightenment to us here, many of us in Brantford and throughout the area that appreciate trees as I do. So I'll be talking about native trees, how we help to care for them, good ways to ensure that they have a healthy life when they're being planted, and some of the benefits that they provide. I'm sure we're aware of many of them. I'll have some lists on some native trees that are easily obtained off of the internet, and we'll finish up with a little bit of 2 insects that have made their way or making their way towards Connecticut that we want to keep an eye out for. And I'll start my PowerPoint if the screen is being shared. Are we all set to go there, Sharon? Thank you.
You should be okay.
All right, excellent. So today we're going to talk about planting and caring for our Connecticut native trees and shrubs. It won't be native.
Nothing's coming up yet.
Let's see here. You got that?
Nope.
Give me a second here. Here we go. All right.
Wow, there you go.
Better?
All right.
All right. So since I'm a tree geek and a tree guy, I'll start with our shade trees. So Connecticut is actually covered by 67% tree canopy. So when we're flying into Bradley, most of what we're seeing is tree canopy, at least when we're in the growing season, of course. And I think it's amazing that ranks first in the country for what they call urban land coverage. Basically, it means when we look at a map right here, which we have of Connecticut outlined, most of what we see is green. That's great. We have some areas in Hartford. We can see it's a little more white. We've got New Britain, Waterbury down south along the coast. We have Bridgeport. But really, when we're looking at Connecticut, we have a lot of greenery, and that's great for habitat, for animals, for a whole host of reasons. And I think it's amazing that we're still 67% tree canopy through all this time. So amongst those trees. These are the 10 most common native shade trees. A lot of trees that you may be familiar with. There's a couple on here that aren't listed. There's ash tree that are in there. Many years ago, this would have been highly populated with American chestnut and American elms. Unfortunately, diseases have found their ways into the state and has really wiped out nearly all of those. So this is what we have left. It makes me a little sad to see the sugar maple only at 6%. That tree has always meant something to us here in New England, right? Our sugar production, and it's having a tough time with our climate change, with some other issues that are going on. But I always like to recommend people plant sugar maples whenever they ask me about a nice shade tree that they might have in their property. It'd just be nice to have more of them. I couldn't find a source that gave us what our most common shrubs and smaller trees were. Of course, mountain laurel is going to be very high on there. That's our state flower, of course. It's all over the place in the woods. But I couldn't seem to locate something that would give us a number on the exact amount of smaller shrubs that are native in the area. So I'm all for planting trees, but why do we want to plant native trees? And I'm not here to say we shouldn't be planting native trees, but let's talk about native trees. There's so many benefits to our wildlife. We had a wonderful presentation with bees last week, which I learned so much about, and they often need native plants because they are native to this area, right? So all the benefits to our wildlife. We're going to watch a really interesting little 90-second video on tree communities and communication. We'll talk a little bit about our planting guidelines and why diversity is important. And I thought this picture of this little fox was adorable. My wife took that, and it just said, "This is great habitat." And I thought it was just a great little picture to start with. So benefits to wildlife, pretty basic, right? Pretty straightforward. It's feeding our animals throughout the year. It's giving them what they need to survive. It's giving them habitat, the places they need to live, what they need to make their nests with. And down at the bottom there, you'll see a website, and that's something I pulled off the internet. It's a native tree availability list. I think it might be a little old, so I'm not sure exactly how updated it is for the nurseries that carry native plants, but I found it a really interesting website with some good information on native trees and shrubs and where you can locate those trees and shrubs, what nurseries carry them. Again, not sure how updated the sources are, but it's worth checking into. And I'm happy to get back to this website if someone is looking for this towards the end of the presentation.
This is the one we use.
So we'll break out into a little bit. And in the springtime, this website was saying silver maple, red maple, and American elm are great for sustenance. I found that pretty interesting because I don't typically think of those trees as having early season food sources, but according to some of the websites, that is the case. Now, many of these trees are where different habitat is being created for nesting, but that's a little bit different than creating food for these animals. And I had to put a picture of a beautiful American elm there, just flowing up, cascading over. Such a great shade tree, doesn't destroy the lawn as it matures. You still get some sunlight under there. Really a fantastically shaped tree. As we move into summer, and this is a very short list of some of the native trees and shrubs, but some of the ones that I wanted to highlight, we get the red mulberry. And I remember growing up, we had a mulberry tree in our backyard, and my dad could not stand it. It creates so many berries, and it's such a messy tree. but the wildlife really, really rely on that tree, and it's a bit of a mess, and can create some hazards if it's in the wrong area, if it's in a walking area, but really an interesting tree. And we have our blueberries, the service berries, black cherries. These are trees that have little berries that birds and all sorts of wildlife are feeding on. In the picture there, we have your service berries, shad bush, amelanchier, shad, whatever. There's many different common names for it. Really interesting plant that will grow in many different locations, can be in full sun. I've seen them in shade. They will not flower as profusely, but they're kind of sparse, have a multi-stemmed growth habit. It's rare to see the single stem. Well, and this picture to me is what they would look like a little more in the wild, but can really be a beautiful accent to a garden, to a landscape, and you can use them in many different ways. So we can get really creative with our native trees and shrubs and really let them accent the beauty of our properties, as well as providing for the habitat and the food that our animals need out there. We move into fall, and there's a long list for fall, of course, as trees are often starting to get ready for the winter. They have berries. This picture right here is a hawthorn, and hawthorns are beautiful trees. They do have thorns, as the name would indicate. So you have to watch whether you're planting that in an area where people might be grabbing it. But look at that tree. It's just so beautiful in full glory right there. We have some viburnum on the list here. Our red cedars, again, tons of berries from these trees. Our beautiful flowering native dogwood. These are all great for our habitat here. Walnuts, we look down at the bottom there. I know some people aren't crazy if you have a walnut over a parking area over your roof, but if it's in a woods line in an area, there's going to be so many happy rodents from a tree like that. Same with your American beech. These trees, the oaks, the hickories, they're creating such an amazing source of food going into the winter, which is really, really tough on our animals, of course. And then I had to call this winter lifesavers. In the hardest time of the year, there are still animals out there foraging. So we get our more viburnum. I can't get enough of our different viburnum around here, whether it's native or even some of the non-natives. They're such a hardy, beautiful plant. They add some great color to landscapes, some real fragrant varieties out there. The picture is showing us some winterberry, which that picture just creates such wonderful contrast. You get a little bit of snow in the winter, and it's really striking. And we've got gardens, right? In the winter, it can be a little dull out there. Isn't it nice to see a little color and a little contrast as we're moving through the doldrums of winter and everyone is planning and getting ready for spring? I know I'm counting the days till I can get my dahlias back in the ground.
Henry County Jail. So she is obviously now.
So habitat is pretty basic, pretty straightforward. I don't think we need to get too in depth here, but right, our trees and our shrubs are providing the place for these animals to live. You might not like raccoons in your garbage or in your yard, but yeah, they're around, they're part of nature. We have tree frogs, different birds that are nesting. It's all so important. And in our native trees and shrubs, our animals have grown to know those to live within. So they're entirely ready to take advantage of all of those opportunities out there. So trees are interesting in that we see them grow, they grow slow. We don't think that they can really communicate well, or that they're beings, basically. But we're gonna watch this 90-second video, and for those of you that haven't seen this before, or heard about it. I was really blown away when I first learned this, and I had been an arborist for a couple of years, for several years actually, before I really was brought into this and fully understood how trees interact with each other. So we're going to hope that this YouTube video will play. It's only about 90 seconds long, but I think you'll find it really interesting.
Sorry, I'm one of the audience. I just want to say your YouTube has a dot between 2 and B in YouTube. So I think that link is not going to work. You might want to type it in.
Are you guys seeing this right now? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
We're not.
All right,
Nick.
I'm going to share.
Nick, as someone said, your link is spelled wrong. There's a dot between in the word tube.
There it is.
How's
There we
this?
go.
We seeing this here?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing it,
Fantastic.
but we're not hearing it. I'm not hearing it.
Not hearing it.
You need to unmute now.
We good?
No, you're muted.
Here we go. All right, this should be better.
Mm-mm.
Did we get in the volume here?
Nope.
All right. All right.
We can read the captions.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you the gist of it. So trees have an amazing ability for their roots to talk to each other. So when we have like trees in an area, their roots are grafting with each other and they're sharing information. They're not talking in the sense that we talk, but they're sharing information with each other. So for example, if there's an insect that comes along and starts attacking one tree, it will send a signal down its root system into other surrounding like trees. So the same types of trees, and that will trigger that other surrounding tree to start building defense chemicals. So that tree is in essence communicating with one of its neighbors. And it's much more than that. They actually share resources with each other. So they're sharing. When one tree is doing well, it can share with its offspring, and not even its offspring, but other trees of the same type. So communal areas with trees are much healthier. Now, unfortunately, we often have trees in yards where there's 1 or 2 trees, and they're kind of isolated at that point, and they're not as happy as a tree in a community would be. So as we often put human characteristics to non-human creatures, and there are trees called mother trees. They're typically the largest tree within an area, and they will in fact be the one that shares the most resources, gives to the young trees in the area. It's really fascinating how trees work to help each other out. And unfortunately, in what we call the urban forest, which is what we all live in, we don't live in natural areas, most of us, I should say. We may have 1, 2, we may have many trees, but it's not really what they would experience in nature. So they're a little isolated. They might be the only type of their kind within an area, and those trees are typically less healthy. Certain trees, we talked about black walnuts, they will actually even put compounds into the ground that are in some ways toxic to other things growing. They're trying to kind of lay a stake to their territory, basically, and they don't want others to grow around them. There are a handful of trees that incorporate that technique. So I'm going to get back into our PowerPoint here. All right, you all with me here?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we'll get a very quick guidelines for planting. We're coming into spring. Hopefully people are getting out there, working within their gardens and thinking of what they might plant and might put in the ground right now. So at the nurseries, you're going to see different types of selections. Balled and burlapped B&B. That is what's exactly what it says. It's in that brown burlapped case. And that is generally going to have more root mass than the typical container stock. When plants are in containers, depending on how long they've been in there, their roots can really start to encircle and encourage a very undesirable growth pattern. So the B&B stock is typically a little bit larger, but will often have a better success of surviving if it's the same type. If you're taking a B&B plant of one size and comparing it to a container stock of the same size, the B&B typically is a better selection if you have that option. When you're at the nursery, it's the best time to look for the right form of the tree. So if you're looking for a tree, you want to look for typically a nice dominant single trunk stem, one that doesn't have too many crossing and rubbing branches. So when the tree is young, that's the best time to find that good form or even correctively prune it. Now, that's going to obviously change if you're looking for a smaller shrub, if you're looking for a fruit tree. We typically train fruit trees to grow in an extremely unnatural way. So the form may be very different, but at the nursery is the best time to try to find the good stock. We also want to be planning for the future, right? And what I mean is not what does that plant look like today, but what's it going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And I will say as an arborist in the field every day, not a week goes by where I talk to someone that tells me this plant was only supposed to be so tall. How many of you have that experience in your garden, right? You went to the nursery, you looked at the tag, it said X feet, and now it's 2 or 3 times X feet. It is pretty common, unfortunately. I don't blame the nurseries, but understand that if you're planting that something that says 10 feet height, it might get bigger than that with time. So plan for the future, look down the road. And I'm often asked, all right, now, so we have the plant at home. What are we looking, how we want to plant it? How should the hole be dug? And the general guideline is 2 to 3 times the width of whatever container or root ball you have. So that can be pretty large depending on what you're getting. That's going to give the plant its best chance to spread out into its new environment, its new home. If you're only digging the hole large enough to kind of pop that container in the ground, it's already going to likely want to stay in that zone where the container is, but we want it to grow into its new home. We want it to, again, try to make those connections with surrounding plants so they can do their form of communication and helping each other. And by digging the hole wider than the ball that you're getting, you're going to be loosening the soil and you're going to be giving it a better opportunity to be spreading outwards. And with that, when you take your plant apart, you may not want to cut those outer roots, but you really, really should be aggressively doing that. So far as to literally shave off that outer edge. You may think that you're harming the plant or that you're doing a disservice, but I assure you that you're going to have maybe a short-term setback, but that plant is going to be much more likely to grow into its new home. And shaving off that outer edge, or at the very, very least, aggressively cutting whatever's growing on the edge there, will help to ensure that plant grows into its new home. One of the biggest things that I see as an arborist every day is unfortunately that plants are put in too deeply, whether it's a multi-stemmed shrub, a single tree, and that is usually because when a plant is dug out of the ground, soil is often piled around the stem. And whenever we see a tree, we want to see a root flare. And what I mean is that it should never look like a telephone pole. A tree should never, ever, ever look like a telephone pole going into the ground. It should have a nice flare. And that starts when that plant is brought home from the nursery. Before it's put in the ground, you need to excavate down to find where that root flare is. And when we don't do that, we're setting the tree up for a shortened life and some really undesirable growth patterns. Unfortunately, we see it a lot, but when you're getting that plant home from the nursery, specifically if it's a tree, find that root flare before it goes in the ground. You don't know the right depth until you peel an inch of soil off. Sometimes it's 6 inches to a foot of soil that's been piled onto that stem. Well, I like to see new trees supported only if they need it. If you're putting in a small tree, you might put in 2 or 3 stakes to help hold it up. But ultimately, we want that tree to develop its own root system where it flares out and the tree is supported on its own weight. So we really want to only stake when needed. Now, if it's a larger tree or it's a very loose root ball, you're going to need to do that. Mulching is so important. We don't want too much mulch. We don't want it to look like a volcano. Anyone see that here? We call it volcano mulching. It's an epidemic with landscapers, unfortunately. And so we don't want the mulch touching the trunk, but we do want 1 to 2 inches of mulch around at least the new root ball that you've put in, and as far out as you'll allow it to go. If it's a tree, the drip line is ideal. We understand that as trees grow and the drip line, the canopy starts to expand, you may not have room for that, but mulch is so important. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but mulching is extremely important for new plants. It regulates soil temperature, breaks down organically to nourish the soil. It provides the right nutrients. There's so many benefits. And this is a tough one right here. Watering. I'm often asked about watering and how much is the right. Anyone have a question here? How much should I water my new plant? And I wish I had a straightforward answer for you, but there's so much that goes into that, right? Is it in a full sun area? Is it in shade? How much water does the plant want? What is your soil like? Is it a very sandy soil that drains quickly? Is it more of a clay soil that's holding water? So there's really no simple answer for how long should I water this. The best advice I can give you is that most plants want soil moisture, and that means for it not to be super dry, so bone dry, and that means not for you to have standing water or saturation. And if you stick your finger in the ground and it's moist, that's what most plants are looking for. They don't want too much or too little. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but most want it to be moist. And overwatering, of course, can be just as harmful or more harmful to a plant. You can really encourage a couple of different diseases that are really toxic to plants. These are some pictures I took, and this was kind of sad. This picture on the right was an apple tree planted in a homeowner's orchard, and it had been there maybe 10 years or so. And excuse me, the left I'm saying. This red line is where the mulch was. The yellow line indicates where the root flare was. That's how the plant should have been in the ground, but it was planted 12 inches approximately too deeply. So what happened was that's encouraging a lot of diseases within the tree. It's encouraging girdling roots, which some of you may have heard of, where the root system wraps around itself. And this tree that had been in the ground for 10 years or so was amongst maybe 15 or 20 other orchards, small orchard trees. And it was the runt of the group. The other ones looked great. And the homeowner asked me, why is this tree not looking so well? And ultimately they decided to have it removed. So I put my hand on the trunk and I pushed it and I literally pulled it out of the ground. And that's all dates back to 10 years ago when the tree wasn't planted properly. It should have sent its roots out laterally. It should have done many things that it couldn't do because unfortunately it didn't have the ability to grow the right way. The close-up picture on the other side that's a tree lilac, and it has the formation of a girdling root. So as the tree grows, that small root is going to grow because it doesn't care what's around it. The stem itself is going to grow, and ultimately it's going to encompass that root. And that root is then going to stop the vascular flow in that section of the tree. You're going to see dieback in the upper canopy. You're going to see a weak crown. And again, that tree was planted too deeply. I had excavated down and I still couldn't find the flare in this picture. So when we plant too deeply, we're encouraging these girdling roots, and ultimately it's shortening the life of your plants when that happens. They'll be okay for a period of years. This isn't something that's going to kill them overnight. But I want to see a plant have a nice, happy, long life in your garden. And that's not going to happen when you plant too deeply. So diversity is key. I can't stress this enough. When we talk monocultures and the same plants around, it could look interesting to certain eyes, but diseases and insects love that. If you have one type of plant, one type of shrub, one type of tree, and there's a specific insect that likes that, or a disease, we talk about American elms, New Haven, the Elm City, the lower green is all elm trees. Those trees are ripe pickings for the Dutch elm disease we were talking about earlier, but those trees are treated preventatively to help stop or prevent that disease from coming in. So what I'm going to show now is a really tragic set of pictures. And the first one is a street near Worcester, Massachusetts. And a couple of years ago, this is actually going back 10 or 12 years now, an invasive insect came in from overseas, was found in this area, really, really dangerous insect. And the government basically put in a policy to remove every single host tree within what they deemed a quarantine area, no matter if it was on public or private property. So you as a homeowner, imagine a beautiful tree in your backyard that you love. It gives you shade. You're watching the birds in it. And all of a sudden this insect comes in and some government official knocks on your door and says, we're taking your tree down whether you like it or not. So this was, again, the Asian longhorn beetle. It's fortunately not in Connecticut. We don't think it's coming here. It's unlikely at this point. So, but this should drive home the key why diversity is important. It's, you leave work one day and you have a beautifully lined street with shade, and all of a sudden you have a desert. So what had to be done here was every single tree that this invasive insect fed on was removed. So you see some evergreens here, you see a couple of smaller trees. Those were not on the host list of that insect, so those were allowed to be removed. But this is a pretty famous before and after picture. It's really tragic, tragic. We do have a couple of problems within the state right now. That bright green insect is called the emerald ash borer. It was first found in Connecticut in 2012, and in the western part of the state, it's all but wiped out the ash trees. There are very few ash trees left that are not currently being preventatively treated for this insect. The ones that are left are very likely infected, and unfortunately, there will basically be no ash left in the state. As you move to the eastern part of the state, that insect has just started to do its damage within the last 3 or so years. And so there still are a good amount of ash trees out that way. But again, unfortunately, there will be almost none left that are not being preventatively treated for that insect. So it looks quite beautiful. That's the adult form. And the adult gently chews on the leaves. That's not the problem, but it lays eggs, and its larvae get just beneath the bark in the vascular system, and it tunnels and creates big problems. It basically clogs up the arteries of the tree, again, to kind of talk human equivalents, and it kills the tree very quickly. So it's unfortunate. The state did try to quarantine the counties as it found the insect. And what I mean is tree companies and anyone was not allowed to move ash trees from one county to the next. Unfortunately, now it's in every county in Connecticut. The quarantine has been lifted because the insect's here. It's not going away, and the ash tree will not be around in short order. It only likes ash trees, which is good news. It will not spread to our maples, our oaks, our hickories, ornamental trees. The only other tree that it's been found in a handful of times were fringe trees. We rarely see fringe trees, but it has been known to feed on that tree. And the last insect I'll talk about is this interesting spotted one. It's a moth, or a spotted lanternfly. It has a pretty heavy presence in Pennsylvania, has moved into New York, and is on its way to Connecticut. We fully expect it to be here soon. A couple of dead ones have been found in the state, but to my knowledge, no live lanternfly have been spotted yet. That's strange, spotted, yep. This insect likes ailanthus trees. So tree of heaven. I don't know if anyone knows about that tree, but it's about the worst named tree you can imagine. They're typically not very nice trees. That's its preferred host. Again, that's a tree from overseas. That's its natural food source. But this one, unfortunately, will feed on other trees. It will feed on maples. It'll feed on vines. Are a big one. There are big problems with this insect and vineyards. It is an extremely aggressive insect, and it feeds very aggressively. I had a really interesting video to show you, but I'm afraid that my YouTube link down below won't work either. I guess I'm a better arborist than Zoom Navigator. but it can be very, very graphic. You won't even see the trunk of the tree sometimes. There will be so many of these flies on the trunk, the tree will not be visible. And there can be so many of them that on a sunny day, if you're under the tree, you could think it's raining. And unfortunately, that's their waste coming down. It is absolutely gross. So that's a pretty distinctive insect. If you find one of those around, you should contact the agricultural station, the Connecticut Experimental Agricultural Station. They'll come out and as I said, unfortunately, we see that the tide is rising. It's coming our way. It'll be here. It's not the same type of insect as the emerald ash borer that will definitely kill every single ash tree, but it's still a harmful insect, and it could really wreak havoc with a huge growing industry in our state, the vineyard industry, right? There's vineyards all over the place now, and this is a destroyer of vineyards. So we're really hoping that there's some way we can avoid that. So that's the end of my conversation with natives and plantings. There are some pretty good sites out there to visit. The Connecticut College Arboretum has a native plant collection. If you've never been to the Arboretum in New London, I strongly recommend it. It's free. It's well laid out. There are actually 2,400 plants, last I knew. They're probably beyond that now. Within the Arboretum, 2,400 native plants, I should say, within the Arboretum. It's a beautiful place. It's a nice place to walk through on any sunny day. Again, it's free. It's right in New London, and I can easily find it. The Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, again, a good resource to look to for natives. And then a couple of websites that you can check out between UConn, which will list a lot of plants that can be used in different areas, and then plantnative.org. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. There are some questions.
Excellent. Let me.
The first one is, do crazy snakeworms destroy the roots of trees?
Okay, I'm not sure what a snakeworm is, so I wish I had an answer for you there. I will say that most of our worms aren't necessarily native around here, but they can help to aerate the soil. Sometimes in the wrong quantities, they can do a little more harm than good in kind of robbing the organic matter within the soil.
Okay, yeah. And you answered the question, what do we do if we see these invasive insects? We contact the ag station and beg
Yes,
them.
definitely contact the
Come to our
ag station.
yard. Okay. Someone asked, how large are these insects?
Oh, good question. Good question. So spotted lanternfly, whereas I haven't seen one yet, I think it's about the size of a quarter. So it's definitely big enough where you will see that insect. The emerald ash borer is much smaller. And the reason you'll recognize that, because it's so bright, it's really a striking insect in the summer. You're going to notice the adult form in the summer, in the heat of the summer, flying around. You may even see them coming out of ash, but those are pretty small. I should have had a better idea for you, but those are much harder to spot.
Do we still have gypsy moths?
Another good question. So the gypsy moth scare of a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, is really gone at this point. The natural control mechanisms have made their way back in. We've gotten the moisture that we need for the disease, the fungus, to control it. So you really shouldn't have any gypsy moth issues this year. There might be some very small and localized outbreaks, but it's going to be nothing like it was about four-ish years ago.
Okay. Is woolly adelgid still a problem for hemlocks?
Yeah, so unfortunately, hemlock woolly adelgid is still alive and well, but what's not alive and well are its food sources. So there are not many hemlocks left, especially many natural stands. I remember growing up and going for walks in Westwoods over in Guilford, and there were hemlocks everywhere. But that insect has all but wiped out our hemlocks, so it is still around. We just don't see as much of it because there's not as much food source for it anymore.
It is destroying that hemlock behind Coles. You know, the very old
Oh,
one,
that
however,
beautiful weeping hemlock?
the weeping hemlock, yeah.
Hmm.
However, parts of it have been taken by, I think, Broken Arrow and Summer Hill. And they've grown them successfully. So they're waiting another couple of years until they get bigger and stronger. And I guess at least one of them will be on the green.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, adelgid can be very, very effectively controlled with the horticultural oil application. I know
Mhm.
that we want to limit our use of pesticides, but horticultural oil has very low impact on most of our beneficials. It should be applied early in the season to smother the insect when many things are not even out yet. So if there's a hemlock that's worth protecting, that is a very viable option.
Somebody asked, could you talk a little about tree maintenance?
All right. So trees are best cared for when they're young and growing. That's the best time to catch problems, to catch undesirable growth habits, insects or diseases as they're growing along. But many times we don't get to them till they're a bit older. So through the growing season, you want to be checking trees that look like you think they should. If there's something that doesn't look right, then you should talk to someone that will have a little more experience. But proper pruning and fertilization will go a long way. Most of our trees, unfortunately, don't have their natural environment. And I mean, they're not growing in the woods where the leaves are breaking down, the mulch is breaking down, that's naturally feeding them. Many of our trees have turf growing around them, and turf and a very, very different soil ecosystem. So providing a home for a tree with a nice mulch ring will do a lot for that tree, ensuring the watering. So it's not a ton different than the planting that we talked about, right? Having the right soil moisture, all of these things, whether the tree is young or as it ages, all comes into play.
What is silver maple?
I'm not sure what that question means, but silver maple is a type of maple we have here in Connecticut. It grows huge, and the species profile for silver maple is that it's most commonly known to have many, many codominant stems. What I mean is that it can have one trunk that splits into many large branches, and those are traditionally less stable than a single dominant trunked tree. Silver maples are also notorious to have some decay within their stem as they age. They can get very large, have 5 to 6 foot diameter trunks. So it's not unusual for there to be decay in a large old tree like that somewhere. And they're a little weaker wooded than, say, our sugar maples.
Is there a disease that is harming beech trees now?
So if you're talking about copper beech, that is more of the landscape tree. And there is a disease called Phytophthora that is in most of our soils. It's all around, but it takes advantage of stressed and weakened trees. And that can often be the case for either a newly planted tree, because a newly planted tree is stressed, or a very old tree. And our beech trees, our beautiful beech trees, are definitely under attack. There's a couple of other things that go into that equation, but Phytophthora within the soil is the real killer of beech trees. It will affect other trees, but we see it a lot on beech trees. When you look at that beautiful gray silver bark, if there are black lesions, usually in the lower 6 feet of the stem, starting around the base of the tree, that's a good indicator that you have this disease Phytophthora. It can be treated, but these old majestic copper beeches really suffer badly from it.
When you dig a hole for a tree, do you add any amendments like compost or fertilizer when planting?
Great question. That is something that should have been in my slide. So you definitely want to add some organic amendments, and we want the tree to grow into its new environment, and not stay in its root ball. So root systems are smart. They can sense when there's something good around them and they'll grow towards that. So if we put a little, some amendments just outside of that root ball area, we're going to, again, encourage those roots to grow out. We want to be careful with fertilizer on a new tree. Fertilizer is very helpful, but you can overstimulate the plant. You can fry the roots if you really use too much fertilizer. So using the right type is important. A slow release or organic fertilizer is much better than something that traditionally is used on a lawn that stimulates growth. That's not the best for a new plant.
Our two mature oaks are looking weak with dead branches falling over our lawn and street. Can we feed it something or just keep it pruned?
So oak trees are about the messiest of all your trees. So if you have an oak tree, you're used to raking up and cleaning, and not only the acorns, but limbs. They are messy trees. And that doesn't mean anything bad necessarily. Now, it can be an indicator that there's something wrong, but I look at oak trees every single day that have large dead branches, and I'm talking 10-inch diameter and larger, and that's not necessarily the worst thing. So pruning it will clean the aesthetics of the tree, but it won't necessarily make it a ton healthier. Now, if there's a disease element there and you're removing that, that can be beneficial. But again, fertilizing properly is a good idea for even a mature tree. But again, I say properly, so not just blindly putting down 10, 10, 10. That's kind of the old farmer recommendation. We know here in Connecticut that we don't need that middle number, phosphorus. All of our soils have plenty of phosphorus for whatever you're doing. So the general 10, 10, 10 recommendation is maybe not exactly what the plant is looking for. I recommend, if you want to fertilize, to know what type of soil you're working with. You can even take a soil sample to get a prescription-based recommendation.
Would you briefly explain again planting depth and the root flare? Is the root flare to be just below the top of the soil or actually showing on the soil? Thank you.
Great. So this is again more towards trees. It's harder to find a root flare on a shrub, but if you're planting a small tree, yes, you want to peel that soil away from the immediate base to where you'll just see it flaring out. So tomorrow when you're outside and if you're going on a walk somewhere, if you see any tree that has grown naturally, it will have that flare. Now, a larger tree is going to be more pronounced than a young tree, but when you get that tree from the nursery, don't be shy and peel away until you start seeing a little bit of that flare come out. And it doesn't have to be a lot of flare, but just enough.
If a tree succumbs to verticillium wilt, how can you find out what trees can be planted in that area that won't be affected by verticillium wilt?
All right, so verticillium wilt is a soil-borne pathogen. It works its way in, and it's very common with Japanese maple. So if any of you have a Japanese maple in your garden here, and you see a section of the tree die off, it could be even a pretty good sized section, that there's a good chance that that is verticillium wilt. That is a soil-borne pathogen, so kind of difficult to control. And it's one of the few times where if your tree dies from it, you probably shouldn't put the same type of tree in that area unless you actually get rid of the soil. There's really no good treatment option for it, unfortunately.
Is this pileated woodpeckers harm trees, or are they beneficial?
So my understanding of woodpeckers is that they're going after a tree for one of a few reasons. One, there could be a food source in the tree, could be a bug inside they're going after. We're seeing that a lot now with the ash trees. If you have an ash tree, there's a woodpecker peeling that bark off, you see a discoloration. That's going after a food source. But woodpeckers also are often going after trees because they like the sound. They're using it to, whether it's mark their territory or not. So the question as to if they're harming the tree or not, I would doubt it. We often deal with sapsuckers. Those are the woodpeckers that leave the horizontal lines across your trees. They do it across many, many types of trees, but that insect is really not harming the tree. It's going after the sap in the tree. It likes the sweetness of it. So it's using it as basically a food source, and they can really, really put a lot of holes in a tree, old apple trees, sugar maples, even some evergreens, and they rarely harm the tree. So woodpeckers are typically not associated with much tree damage.
That's good, because they're cute.
Exactly.
So it sounds like if a tree comes out of a container and you see roots are circling around that container, then you should cut all that circling out.
You want to cut that outer edge off for sure. I'm not telling you to cut it all the way back, but that outer edge, you literally can take a knife and go all the way around that outer edge. You're going to be cutting a lot of roots, but you're going to be helping that plant for the long term. It's shocking to see it done, but I promise you that plant is going to be better off. It might be a little damaged in the short term and a little bit stressed, but if you're trying to encourage that plant to have the longest, happiest life, you can't have a circling root system. It's got to grow out radially like the spokes on a tire.
Okay. Do you know who takes care of that gorgeous elm near Karen's Corner?
I used to take care of that elm years ago. I hope that the town is still doing something for it. I'm not sure, but that is an absolutely majestic elm. So gorgeous. I knew immediately when you said, is someone taking care of that elm? So I unfortunately don't know if someone's taking care of it. I definitely hope someone is, though. That is a town tree, so they are hopefully allocating some resources to a really beautiful specimen.
Doug Talamy suggests that we plant trees in groups like 10 feet apart so that their roots can grow together and support each other like in nature. Would that be recommended?
Yeah, that's a little bit of what I was trying to get across earlier, in that when you plant them next to each other, their root systems are going to communicate with each other. And spacing can be a difficult challenge. I won't say there's a right or wrong amount to how closely you plant trees. A lot of that has to do with what you want them to look like now versus what they're going to look like 50, 60, 100 years from now. So you have to make that decision as the person planting them. But whenever I make a planting recommendation, I always tell people, we are not planting for us. We are planting for the future, right? It's a tree is going to outlive all of us. So when you're planting, try to think of the future generations.
So Nick, can I give everybody your email address in case people need to contact you? Is that acceptable?
Definitely. I love tree questions. As I said, I'm a tree geek. So if you have a tree or a shrub question, I'm happy to give you guidance and steer you in the right direction. Always happy to answer a tree question.
Well, this has been a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And let me just give out your email before you go away so I have it right. It's Nick Vallas, right?
And Vallas, and Vallas.
Nick N. Vallas.
No,
At
no,
Bartlett-
just N
Oh,
Vallas, no
N, I'm
Nick.
sorry, N. Vallas at bartletttrees.com.
Little different. I'll give it out here.
Okay, you do it. You do it.
N Vallas, so NVALLAS at bartlett.com. And that's BARTLETT.com. 2 T's at the end there.
Nick, thank you again for coming and talking to us tonight and helping educate us about how we should treat some of our really good friends out there.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me. It's been great.